So, welcome to Your Irish Connection. We're having chats about how we do these Irish spirituality things with myself, Lora O'Brien. And today we have with us the fantabulous Anna Nikut. And Anna is over in Athlone still, aren't you?
I am remote, not too far.
Yeah. So, as usual, I went into your Facebook and rated your pictures.
Look at that lovely one of me and Ella together.
I know. I did actually check. You probably didn't see the message, but I did check that it was okay for it to put the sprog up. But she's all over your Facebook anyway, so I figured it was.
No, that's fine. No problem.
And is that Ragnar there with you?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry about that. I know you lost him.
Oh, he's okay. He was very ill. He'd been ill for a long time.
Oh.
And he was a very, very sweet horse. But
he was with you for a long time, wasn't he?
We rescued him about a year and a half ago. But he was really dead when we rescued him, and he came back a lot. He'd forgotten how to be a horse, so he remembered, and he had a great year and a half, to be honest. But he was just suffering a lot in the end. So the right thing to do.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll begin with the first question. So, when and where did your interest in Irish spirituality begin?
Okay. In Irish spirituality in particular, I think that probably my whole life it's something that I've been interested in, but without really realizing that that's what it was called. I come from a very colourful background, to say the least. My father is he ran away from home when he was 16 and joined the circus, and he was a lion tamer.
Right.
In the circus. Yeah, he worked with big cats and bears, to be precise.
Right.
And when he left the circus, he went and he travelled all over the world. He went to Nepal and India, spent a lot of time, and he was then he was a roadie for David Bowie and Ian Dury when he met my mother, who was working for Rolling Stone magazine in London. And they formed a love bond very quickly. They were real hippies in London. It was the early 70s, and Mum got pregnant with me very quickly, and they moved back to Ireland, and we lived in a 1-2-room house. We didn't have any indoor plumbing, no indoor toilet or anything when I was born, and it was a very rural, very nature-based upbringing, and I think that it was brilliant, and it was a great start, and I feel very sure that that's when, right from the very beginning, it was, even though I didn't know what the words were, the land had claimed me, and I knew that this was my land. So it was right at the very beginning. Now, having said that, I did grow up. I was a very spiritual person when I was younger, but I only had access to Christianity. Was really my only access, my only way of
like expressing that spirituality.
Yeah, expressing it. Yeah, even though we weren't Catholics, my mum was Church of England, and my dad didn't really have a religion, though he would have been Catholic. So we were brought up as Church of Ireland, and I absolutely loved going to church on a Sunday. I loved the singing, and I loved the sense of belonging,
Mm.
you know. And it was very different from what a lot of people my age would have experienced having a Catholic upbringing.
Mm.
It was a very, very different experience. And I loved it. You know, we used to go to Bible school on a Sunday, and you know, I absolutely loved it. I love the singing. That was one thing that really, really sticks with me, was the singing, and the stories. But at a very young age, I started questioning. I remember asking my mum, you know, if there's a God, why isn't there a goddess? You know, it didn't seem right to me. There was no balance. There was no, you know, why is there a man but no woman? You know?
Yeah.
Why do men rule this thing, you know?
I do know. And it's interesting actually, because I know a couple of people who would have grown up with or in and around Church of Ireland, and it now, it wasn't my experience obviously, but a common thread would be the community and the connection to the community, and it would have been a very not quite marginalized community in the way that we would see it, but certainly small. Yeah,
I would say very marginalized.
Right. Yeah. I mean, still.
Sorry.
No, I was going to say, like, still accepted because it was Christian, but there was also the whole Catholic Protestant thing going on, and you know, it just. So yeah, so I hear you where you're coming from with the sense of community, and it's interesting actually seeing you now and how passionate you are about community. And you know, I didn't realize that there was that Church of Ireland background, but it kind of makes sense now as well, you know, that would have been a seed planted early.
And in some ways, you know, mentioning that whole Catholic and Protestant thing, it actually, like, they dig their own graves in a way, because we were very ostracized as children because we were Protestants, you know, and 98% of everybody else that lived around us were Catholic. I mean, I remember at a young age just, you know, walking home from school, and you know, stones being thrown at us and being called prostitutes instead of Protestants, because that was a really, like, you know,
hilarious.
Really funny. Yeah, absolutely hilarious. And now there was other things as well. I mean, we were blow-ins as well. You know, my parents, you know, moved over to Ireland from England, and we also had horses, like gypsy style horses at a very young age, or all my life when I was younger. So that was another thing that kind of, you know, everyone else was farmers, and everyone else, you know, and we went to the local Church of Ireland school rather than the Catholic school, because only because it was going to close down. When I started in the school, there was 12 people in the whole school, and we were all in one room.
Right.
One room, all the different levels were in one room, and there was like 2 people in my class, you know. So we went to so it was difficult. So in a way that made the community that I did have even more important, you know. That makes sense.
It does. Makes perfect sense. And like I said, it's interesting to kind of trace that as a root of your passion for community now, because I would say that's one of your strongest points as a pagan, almost, you know, that your commitment to that, like, and I think it's
so many,
a credit
it's
to you.
hard to pinpoint one, you know.
Yeah, of course, but I just mean it's a credit to you, Anna, that's all.
And then, you know, I kind of touched off the horse part, but then we would have had a childhood of living in community as well, very different type of community, which would have been a community of traveling people, which not travelers as in Irish native travelers, but traveling people, nomadic people who lived with horses and horse-drawn wagons and stuff, and that was like living in a big family, but living very, very close to nature, you know. So, you know, we were washing in rivers and cooking at the side of, you know, in campfires at the side of the road, and me and my sister, we slept under the wagon with the dogs, you know, on straw, and that was a big family as well. So and you lived by the seasons, and you lived by the moon, and you lived by, you know, the stars, and you heard all the stories about all, you know, the fairies, and, you know, oh, don't go trampling down that fairy ring of mushrooms, and you know, oh, let's go to this place because there's a well there that we need to go and see that's connected with such and such. And you know, so as I said, even though we didn't have the words for it, it was a lived experience, very much a lived experience.
Yeah. And I think a lot of like, again, it's a common theme, like when people are talking about Irish spirituality and the kind of the roots of that for them, that'd be something that I'd hear as well. Like, we didn't have the words for it, you know, but that connection is there, and it's coming from the land itself, you know, and it's coming from being close to it and living close to it. So, yeah. So when you did kind of start to gain an understanding of the words around it, how did you practically go about getting started? You know, when you kind of came to the awareness that paganism was a thing, or Irish paganism was a thing, how did you get started? Like, what was going on in Ireland at the time? What year was it? Where were you?
I couldn't really tell you. I was always really, I mean, growing up, I didn't really know that Irish paganism was a thing, but I was like, I was an avid reader, and I read books about everything. And one of my favorite topics would have been books about Greek and Roman mythology. And, you know, I would eat up books about the Greek gods and the Roman gods. And I remember building little altars as a child to them. And, you know, just really, I was so interested in them. Even though I didn't know that they were, to me, it was just mythology at the time. But, you know, I didn't realize that there was actually people that still believed in them, and, you know. But my mother would have one of my first experiences. I think I was 16 years old, and my mum brought me and my sister to Huntington Castle. To one of the festivals. I mean, this is like, must be 30 years ago. And I met Lady Olivia, and, you know, I think that was probably my first actual real thing.
Yeah. And I don't think
Irish thing, for want of a better word.
Just for anybody listening, that would be the Fellowship of Isis, who have had a space in Huntington Castle there for, God, must be 30, 40 years now, isn't it? I'm not sure exactly the date, but
the first time I ever met you as well was in Huntington Castle. You probably don't remember, but
I've only been there once, believe it or not.
It must have been that time. Was it about 15 years ago, maybe?
It would be now,
That's what that was the first time I ever met you. I was just thinking about that today.
I think I was there twice. I think I went once later on with Lydia and Barbara, but that would have been more recently. But I was there twice. But I don't think the Fellowship of Isis call themselves pagan specifically.
No, they don't. But, you know, it would have been, say, my first kind of official paganish thing.
To all intents and purposes, like it's goddess centered spirituality. So
it's feminine, you know, it's female, deity centered. When I went to college and I got a degree in marketing, and I then traveled around quite a bit. I lived in Spain for a year. I lived in Italy for 4 years. And I met my husband then, and we moved back to Ireland. I had my daughter and then got divorced, and then I moved back to Wexford. And during that period, I had really started looking at alternatives. I studied Buddhism, and I practiced Buddhism for a number of years. And when I moved back to Ireland, I really felt that reconnection with the land. You know, it was just amazing. And because I'd been away for so long, And I started moving. I started reading a lot and going online, because at that time the internet was just, we had the dial-up connection, and so I started looking into stuff. I moved back to Wexford, I'd say probably 12, 13 years ago, and I met Deirdre Wadding, and I went to Huntington. I went to Clonegall, to Huntington Castle, and I went back there, and Olivia led a journey, and during that journey, I felt I got a calling, let's say, during that journey, and I spoke to some people afterwards about starting priestess training, and they didn't really know anything about it because at that time, people would go to Livia and go, I feel like I'd like to be a priestess, and she'd go, yes, okay, I'll ordain you in 2 weeks' time. Or else she'd go to them and say that she'd had a message, from the goddess, and that, that person needed to be. And that started actually the current training that they do there now, and they've actually trained quite a few people now and I went on a few years. At that time wasn't the right time for me, but a few years later I went on to go through the whole process and was ordained as a priestess of the Fellowship of Isis. So probably about 10 or 14 years ago was when I really kind of officially got back to my roots, back to grassroots.
So 14 years ago would have been, I'm just thinking in Ireland, would have been just before Féile Dréachta started.
It would have been.
Or around the same time, maybe. Because we ran it for 13 years. Yeah. 2003 was the first year for Féile Dréachta, I think.
Okay, so it was probably just after that.
Yeah. So, and the first moots, I think, in Ireland had started in 1999 or 2000. 99, I think. No, before that, 96 maybe. So there was stuff starting like publicly, if you now obviously there had been, the Farrars had been on the Late Late Show and stuff like that, and in the papers. So there was there had been stuff going on obviously before that, but I would say like looking back, the difference between when the moot started and before and after that was where I'd mark the kind of the more public side of Irish paganism, and the accessibility of it, But,
and actually that's what I started. As I said, I'd met Deirdre and I started going to the moot in Wexford, and she was running at the time. It could have been actually a year or two after that, but and that's when I started going, oh my God, there's other people like me, and and they do stuff, and it's amazing, and oh my God, there's actually like stuff that I can learn about this and training, and that's when things started really.
Yeah, and just
I think a lot of people, I think.
Yeah, very much so. Because it was still very underground before that, and that like the first moots would have been before the internet, really. And it was still kind of all word of mouth kind of stuff. But there's a question in the chat there, I think. Bonnie says, Diagwitch everyone. Thank you, Lora, for hosting this, and Anna for speaking to us. One of the barriers for me in learning about Irish spirituality was trying to figure out where to start with the mythology. I tried to cram it in with the saga of Cuchulainn, but with how dense that was, I didn't end up absorbing much of it. It wasn't like the Greek and Roman mythology that I was used to devouring. Did you have a similar experience?
Yes.
Yeah. I found myself very jealous of other cultures' mythologies because they all seem so fucking neat,
I know, and easy.
Yeah.
And it all seems to go on a very nice timeline, and there's like not as many contradictions, and
And the
you know,
clear family trees. Oh my God.
I know.
Oh
And
my
the
God.
moon.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, you have like, usually you have one name appearing once in the story cycles. You know, you don't have like 10 different fucking versions of it that may or may
Yeah,
not be the same person. Like,
yeah, exactly.
yeah. Um, it's
Yeah,
true.
it's very, it's very. To be honest, my Irish mythology leaves a lot to be desired. You know, I'm still learning about it. I find it really hard. You
Yeah.
know, it's just it's so difficult. And luckily there are people who are really good at translating Old Irish and that kind of thing. Because mine is just shite.
Mm,
Well, I don't have any at all. Like it's zero
the
less
old
than
Irish. Yeah. Yeah.
words.
Yeah.
You know, there's no way I'd even be able to go about. I wouldn't even know where to start. So.
Mm. Yeah, and like if you have a bit of modern Irish, you can kind of make a stab. But you know, if you've grown up with modern Irish, you can kind of make a stab at least some of the old Irish. But it's still, you know, it's like trying to read Scots Gaelic or something. It is actually a different language, you know. So, um, but the it is interesting though with the Irish mythology because you know, like it's almost like it kind of it exists in Irish culture either as like the kind of, you know, like either the children's versions, which are
Mm,
tremendously simplified and, you
mm,
know, sanitized,
mm.
or quite dense scholarly stuff, you know. And there
Yeah.
definitely has been. Now it's getting better now, but certainly historically there, you know, like in recent history, there was definitely a lack of just accessible material, you know.
Mm,
Cynthia Watkins said, I found going with children's books made it a bit more digestible than moving on to the more academic ones having that foundation. Yeah, Celtic Wonder Tales by Ella Young. Yeah, and I do often say to people, you know, start with some of the children's stories. Like I'm Killed recommended Michael Scott because I think he's brilliant, and some of
mm.
Eddie Lenihan's stuff for children is great as well, you know.
Oh,
Yeah, but you know, again, they'd be very kind of authentic Irish voices as well, and
mm,
while they'd kind of simplify the material, they don't leave bits out either. You know, they like
yeah.
the bones of it is right. You know, I think when you're looking at some of the children's stories, like they're very different versions of some of the stories. You know, and there's no familiarity really with them. Anyway, we might be getting a bit ahead of ourselves. What sort of things do you do on a daily, weekly, monthly, or seasonal basis to explore or express your Irish spirituality?
Um, so I work, my job is working with my spirituality. So I'm lucky like that. So on a daily basis, I work with my my spirituality. On a month or seasonal basis, you know, I observe all the fire festivals and the quarter days, and usually I'm trying to organize people, other people as well. I'm trying to organize ritual and trying to organize. Um, it's not easy. I find that a lot of Irish people are very how can I say it? They're not as quick to come forward about their own spirituality as
Mm,
they are about other cultures' spirituality.
mm-hmm. Yep.
So you know, I'd often get people say, "Oh, I wish there was more stuff organized and blah blah blah," and then when there is, a lot of time people don't
Yeah,
turn
don't
up,
show up.
and that
Yeah.
can be a little bit disheartening and frustrating at times. But what I try to do is I just make sure that I'm kind of organizing it for myself first,
Yeah.
first and foremost,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then if
Yeah.
other people are there, then great, you know, to join in. If not, I'm happy to be, you know, loner.
It is awful
Um,
hard getting Irish people coming out to stuff, isn't it? It
it
really
really
is,
is.
you know.
And especially when they express that they wish there was more.
Yeah.
And then when you actually, oh, that's great, people are really interested. And then you kind of do try and organize stuff. And, oh, you know, people just, I know people, everyone has their own shit going on. And, you know, but it can be a little bit
Mm,
frustrating. But, you know, as I said, I just make sure that I'm doing it for myself. And um, really my main way of expressing my spirituality, my Irish spirituality, is just getting out there, getting out in nature. And that's often just means, going down to check on the horses, and and touching every tree on the way down, and or just going for a walk and seeing spring starting, or just really getting out there, and then connecting with my my own personal kind of guides and people that I work with on a daily basis.
Are you
I
devoted
don't
to
really have any specific ritual. Sorry, just
yeah, no, yeah.
I don't really have any specific ritual that I do, or unless I need to.
Yeah. Do you have a particular deity that you work with, or are?
So when I was ordained, we one of the things was we were kind of chosen. We were kind of, I won't say we chose a patron, but we were kind of chosen by a particular deity. So I was chosen by the Gaelic goddess Epona, which wasn't very surprising,
Yeah.
although I'd never heard of her before. Well, I had kind of heard of her, but I wasn't really sure. So she, just for anyone who doesn't, she's a horse goddess, which made a lot of sense. And after that, really kind of for a couple of years, I realized that a lot of what I was doing, and I kind of got more involved with working with the Morrigan, and I realized that a lot of what I was doing with Epona was actual Morrigan work, and that she was kind of coming to me through my connection with Epona. And she's very much one of my main deities that I work with, and a lot of the other stuff that I was kind of learning at the time, and I'm still learning about women's mysteries and feminist stuff and all, that kind of stuff kind of fit in a lot with that. And then more recently, actually, I've been working with, for the last year or so, I've been working very closely with Lou.
Interesting.
Bridget's been there right from the start. Yeah.
And just to circle back a little bit, you said you work with your Irish spirituality on a daily basis, like that's the work you do. Do you want to just expand on that a little bit? Like, what's the work?
Well, I work as a shamanic healer, an Irish shamanic healer, and I know that there's a lot of kind of question around using that term. I do use it because it's a word that's known to people, and I'm not really comfortable with other terms that might be used. As in not Farfaza, Banfaza. Banfaza, which is wise woman. And there are other terms as well. It's kind of the one that's I feel fits at the moment.
Yeah, the terminology is difficult, and I think a lot of it, I mean, you've probably heard me rant about it, but like a lot of it is so kind of, I mean, I would almost call it tainted. Like a lot of the terminology, it's not kind of clear cut where it's coming from, or it's being used in different ways than its original intent or meaning or context. And the waters are so muddied now, and it's so hard, and trying to find, and especially where we're coming from in a culture that everything was taken from us, and we've had to look to loan words, because we haven't had it. Well, we used to have it, but we don't have it anymore, and even stuff like that, you're echoing very much, so something I'd kind of often make the joke about not calling myself a Banfasa, and it's not a joke though, because the thought, as an Irish person, the thought of putting yourself, the notions, that should be
Who do you think you are?
Exactly,
Huh?
you know, and the begrudgery that you'd be setting yourself up for,
Yeah.
like, and
Oh,
the
definitely. Yeah.
you know, it just, I'd be like, I know any of us, I think, would be very wary of somebody who would take on that title themselves, you know.
And rightly
Um,
so in a way, because
yeah,
it's a big hat to wear.
it is, and it's something that would have, like, it is something that has remained within our communities, you know, in a different, used in a different way maybe than its original intent, but at least we got to hold on to that one. But it would have been very much one that was presented by the community, you know,
Yeah.
rather than um, a mantle that you take on yourself, you know. And
And seeing as the community aren't really aware of these things anymore, it's, you know, it's really hard to, I don't know, it's a minefield, and I know it is. Even the word shaman has its own set of, you know, I have people sometimes ask me, you know, do I do black magic, or, you know, am I dabbling in the dark arts? And I say only when I really have to. You know? But like, you know, it to be honest, it is a loaded term, and the work that I do is a form of spiritual healing, in that there's contact with spirit. But even that term, to tell someone I'm a spiritual healer, and straight away their eyes glaze over, so even that in itself is loaded. It's so
yeah,
loaded. It's so
yeah.
loaded.
Oh, it's not
So if I
easy.
say Irish, you know, an Irish or an indigenous and or native, you know, I or people ask me, what do you do? And I say it's a form of, you know, earth healing, or, you know, it's really hard.
Yeah. It is very difficult, but it's worth having these conversations, you know, and it's worth continuing to think about it and to talk about it, because obviously that's how we start the process, I believe, of
Yeah,
reclaiming and, you know, trying to clarify some of those kind of muddy waters.
yeah,
Like, personally, the only one that kind of sits comfortably on me is three, but you know,
yeah,
that's no use for a business, you know, it
yeah.
means nothing to nobody, like outside in a
Well,
marketplace, you know.
that's the other side of it, and I'm sorry to bring this into it, but I still have to pay my rent and feed my
Exactly.
child
Yeah.
and feed myself.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know, I can call myself what I want, but if people are going, "What the hell is that?" you
Yeah.
know, and wondering, then I don't pay my rent, you know, and I'm
Yeah.
no good to anybody either. And unfortunately, there is that side of it too. You know, you have to make sure that what you're doing in the name, and sometimes you only have that literally split second moment
Mm.
for people to decide. You
Mm.
know,
Yeah.
um, it's not
Yeah.
perfect, but you know, it's just the way it is at the moment. I'd love it if there was a better word to use for.
Yeah. My friend Izzy, now she's in Texas, so it's a different situation, because there's, you know, there's a whole kind of colonial aspect to it as well. So I know she was very aware of that,
Yeah.
you know, from her position. But she would be a shamanic practitioner as well, or would have been for
Mm,
years, and Reiki as well, and, you know,
yeah.
a couple of other kind of techniques that she'd be proficient in. And I think she changed recently to Guardian Magic.
Oh.
Yeah, which I know she thought very, very hard about it, and I can put you in
Yeah.
touch with her, actually, just if you wanted to have a chat about
No. Yeah.
discussing that.
Yeah.
Because I know, like, she really kind of angsted, or not angsted, I don't mean to
Yeah.
be dismissive. She really thought long and hard over it, and, you
Yeah.
know, and again, she, you know, it's her full-time position, and now again, it's a slightly different situation, because she has a much bigger community to draw from,
Mm,
and
yeah.
her marketplace, for want of a better term, her clients would be more used to a, you know, a broader selection of terminology and that kind of
Yeah.
thing. So so I'm not saying that it's even, you know, kind of comparable, but obviously there are similarities. So it'd be worth maybe having a chat with her about it, because from what I've
Interesting.
seen of the process, it, you know, she seems to have come to a very kind of, it seems very healthy and very settled and
Yeah.
very right for her, you know. So but again, you know, it's only by having these conversations, it's only by thinking these thoughts, it's only by changing people's views and changing people's opinions, and that just takes time, you know. So
Um,
um
recently, and very recently actually, I've started I started off really in 2004, 2007. I started a degree in counselling and psychotherapy, and I graduated in 2011. And I started working almost immediately as a counsellor, and that was my kind of inroad into healing as such. And mental and physical and holistic health. Well, even though that's very much mental health. And quite quickly I realized that, and given me as a person, that counseling just wasn't enough, and that's when I started training as a shamanic practitioner. So that was 7 years ago, 6 years ago, I think 6 or 7 years ago. And then along the way, I've also got like Reiki and crystal healing and past life regression, all that sort of stuff. So I kind of went against the counseling for a little while, but then I realized that what I'm doing is I still do a lot of talk therapy. I still bring that in a lot. So I kind of started calling myself a holistic counselor.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
And that's kind of only in the last month, I'd say, in the last few weeks, I've kind of started calling, or last couple of months, I kind of realized that what I do is more holistic counseling, because it's like mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional,
Yeah.
So I don't know, maybe next year I'll have another name for myself.
Yeah, good. Well, you're growing. That's
exactly.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And like the world is changing, and we are trying to find our way in that, and we're trying to find our feet with that, and we're trying to, be healthy and be respectful and still pay the rent, so
Exactly.
So a balance in all things, I think.
Nobody's bringing me casseroles in spring.
Casseroles and bottles of whiskey. You take the whiskey, though, wouldn't you?
Exactly.
So how important is it to you personally to be in Ireland physically? I know we've touched on this a little bit.
Oh, definitely. It's definite, because I've lived abroad, and it's like, it's fundamental for me now. I'm in my 40s now and heading towards my 50s, but I just realized that I do still want to travel and stuff. I'm all for that, but I can't imagine being old or being buried. I wouldn't want to be buried anywhere else, and I was nearly going to say the sooner the better.
Well, put me in the ground. Put me in the ground.
But no, I mean, it's actually, my family laugh at me, because most of them are like, oh, burn me, and I'm like, just get me in the ground, and I don't even want a coffin or anything. I just want to be worm food, as quick as possible. They're like, what? Do you not want to be cremated? And I said, no, I want to be part of the earth,
So it's pretty important for you to be in Ireland physically, literally in the soil.
In Ireland, yeah, definitely.
Fantastic. And
it's my ground, it's my grounding, and it's the air that I breathe, and I can get a bit emotional when I talk about this sometimes, because it's not everything to me, but
yeah, and I think when you've been away and when you've lived away, like I believe anyway that there's such, especially if you're working with ancestral spirits or guides like we do, you're scratching at that feckin' ancestral trauma that we're all carrying around of having to be away as well,
exactly.
which has never been healed, and we're only learning yet how to even address it and become aware of it, never mind try and heal it in ourselves or in the land or you know, through the ancestral lines or any of those things. And that's even just us on the island here. Like there's obviously whole other layers of that then for all the families who, you know, who had to go away and who are still away. And yeah, so, you know, I think it, when we're away, like I find it even when I travel, and I think maybe it's because I have done like conscious work with this and conscious work to try and kind of connect back into that and heal that. Like when I'm physically off the island, it hurts me. It actually, you know, it physically hurts me, and I get sick, and I, you know, I just like I'm panicking just thinking about it.
It's okay, you're safe now. You're now.
I'm safe.
You're in the safe spot.
Green thoughts, it's fine. No, but I get it. Yeah, and it breaks my heart and cracks open my soul, knowing that all of that trauma is out there for so many people all over the world, you know. And from my own family, my own brothers, one of them now has just come home, thankfully, but the other one's still out there. And you know, like I think every family has had in this generation, you know, has, like, as in the generation that's just gone, like has had a very recent kind of brush with that kind of that trauma. And again, it's layered, and it's gone down so deep, and we're not, as a nation, we're not aware of it, and we're not addressing it, you know.
It's so interesting that you say that, because a couple of years ago, my sister, who's like my best friend, she moved to, actually I'm sure you've met her, Becky. She did fail a Drake with me a few times, and she emigrated to Canada a few years ago, and when she left, I can only say it felt like I'd been kicked in the chest by a big horse. The pain was physical, and it didn't feel like it was all mine, you know. I've only just now, and just a few, now since then, she's actually moved back to England. She lives in England, so it's a lot nearer. But I didn't see her for the 3 years that she was away in Canada, actually, and I felt like I'd never see her again. But it's just now that you said that, has really just clicked, that I've had that memory back, that it didn't feel like it was all of mine. The pain that I felt wasn't all mine, you know.
And you know, and I mean, my brothers left 10-15 years ago first. The first one left, and then the other one more recently. But I don't know, I'm terrible with dates. I can't remember when things happened, but a long time ago anyway. And you know, I've been thinking about this quite significantly through the years, and you know, like the thoughts of, again, that feeling of it's not all mine, because there's this huge feeling of, like, that I'll never see them again, you know. And they're in us, like they're in Canada or they're in Australia or whatever. It is different when they're in England or, you know, even in Europe or somewhere closer. But that certainty of I will never see them again is huge, and it's real. And your conscious brain kicks in and you say, I can fucking WhatsApp him right now, and you know, or FaceTime him or whatever, you know. I can literally physically see, well, not physically see, but I can digitally see him, like literally right now. But that's not what we're talking about, and that's not what we're dealing with. It's not a logical thing. It's not a conscious thing, and I would very much agree with you. I don't think it's ours, you know.
Not all of it, anyway.
No, not all of it. Not all of it. You know, that kind of.
And I just realized that actually it's so, just from what you just said, and I just was brought back to that time, and I thought, because it has always really shocked me how much pain I did feel, and how much, even afterwards, how much it continued to affect my life in such a profound way. And I think it's definitely somewhere you're tapping into this kind of like nationwide kind of ancestral wound, you know, of these
very much
people
so,
that just went away and were never seen again. Forced to go.
But you know, that is not this day. And again, having these conversations and having bringing that awareness, like it's work. I believe that, you know, we do have a responsibility to start addressing and to start looking at if we're working with ancestral lines through Ireland, you know. And I've said it, and I've said it before, like I think what's waiting for us as well is their children are being born in Canada or in Australia or, you know, away. And if we don't look at the uprootedness that a lot of the folks who went to the American continents have faced then through the generations, you know, and if we don't kind of, I don't know what the solution is, but we're going to be looking at their kids and their kids down the line with the same kind of unrootedness and you know, desperate kind of clinging to Irish, whatever Irish was to them when they left, you know, and so now I think we'll be in a better position because of the communication and because of the access and, you know, even the fucking flights that are available, you know, stuff like that. So I don't think we're facing exactly the same problems, but there's definitely elements of it, and there's definitely kind of questions of Irish identity moving forward, and
for sure,
you know, where does that live? And there's just that it's a whole thing back and forward. I think, you know, that again, we need to be having these conversations, we need to be working with it energetically, we need to be talking about it and thinking about it, you know. More work. Yay!
You just made up your words.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Love it. Brilliant. So, but I know that is something that you in particular come into contact with a lot, and you know, this thing about how do we kind of integrate these millions of people who have this notion of being Irish that's maybe like 200 or 300, 400 years old, you know, that's kind of been, okay, maybe not that old, but it's been passed down, and they and have no connection with what Ireland is today, but still feel that really strong identity of Irish.
Yeah, which, like, I don't think any Irish person would begrudge them that identity, because we're very, like, we are very compassionate about it generally. I mean, obviously there's a few fucking bad eggs or whatever, but we are quite compassionate about that, and we do feel that kinship and that connection. And you'll see that on the ground where, you know, somebody shows up in a village looking for their ancestors, and there's a wedding on, and they get invited to the wedding, and you know, 3 days later they're still fucking drinking at the local bar, you know. And like that, I know that's a bit of an urban myth, but actually, or a rural myth even, but actually it's not. I happen to have been in a village when that exact thing happened. But anyway, you know, and like, we do welcome our cousins with open arms. But the difference is, if there's that kind of sense of entitlement or that arrogance about, we're more Irish than you are, which is the problem, you know. Like, I'm the real Irish.
You're not doing it right. Let me explain to you the right way to do it.
So, you know, it's very complicated, and that's actually one of the, you know, one of the issues that actually came up on my Facebook today was, you know, we were talking about this, and I had referred to Americans, and then, you know, there were people of color then who were coming on to it saying, you know, and making very valid points about how, you know, they had Irish ancestry, or people in their communities had Irish ancestry, and, you know, you can't deny them that connection, because they were, you know, obviously we have the kinship there, you know, of having that ripped away from you. So, you know, it's just, it's a mess, and it's a muddle, and there's no easy answer to any of it. But I think as long as we're kind of approaching it, you know, and like, this is literally my life's work, is this authentic connection, and trying to help people connect in a respectful and genuine way, you know, because that's I think where the difference is, you know. And that's why we'll have, you know, people who are fucking Russian, or, you know, from Tanzania, who arrive in Ireland and are, you know, accepted again with open arms, you know, where
I don't know about the open arms bit so much. Not always.
No, not always. And there are the small-minded communities, and the rural problems, and the urban problems, and all of that. Like, it's not that there's no racism in Ireland, because there definitely fucking is. But generally, I think we do have a kinship with people who, you know, if there's a person face to face in front of you, you know, we don't turn them away. It's where we kind of get afraid of the idea of a group of people. That's where the racism kicks in, you know, and that's kind of, I believe that's normal, like normal kind of normal human behavior, actually, like, because it's a
Well,
common
it is,
pattern. Yeah,
definitely.
you know, the outsider, like
Yeah.
we're now, that's not in any way to excuse it or
No.
not by any stretch, but you know, like the Irish are definitely akin to that as well.
Yeah.
But there's just, as I said, there's so much. There's really
Yeah,
so
there
much.
is. There really. But
Um,
as you say, you know, having the conversation about it is really important. You know,
yeah,
talking
and
about it.
yeah, and not coming at anything with a closed mind.
Yeah.
You know, I tend to draw the line, like, where if somebody's Irish, it's that they've lived here, you know, because they're part of the culture, you know.
Yeah.
That's part, like, you have to, well, you don't have to, I suppose. I'm not the fucking boss of who's Irish and who's not, like, you know. But you don't have to do anything. But
In
you
your
know,
opinion,
yeah,
that's where you draw the line.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But at the
I would.
same time, like, it's not with me or you or anybody else to deny anybody their heritage, or that's not anybody's intent. I
No.
believe, you know. Um, we have some. Okay, so there's a question come in privately there, so I'm just going to read it out. How can those wanting to work through the ancestral trauma of parents, grandparents, ancestors leaving Ireland accomplish that with so many back in the homeland so rejecting of them? That's actually kind of a heartbreaking question, because, like, there is that rejection, and unfortunately that rejection is coming not because of the people who left Ireland, but because of the people who presume an entitlement to Ireland, and that's what's being rejected. But again,
Yeah.
like, if people are approaching it with a respect and an openness, and, you know, tell me about your culture rather than coming in and saying, I'm going to tell you about your culture. I think that's where the distinction is for most people, you know, and it does get, obviously, like, we're quite sensitive about people coming in and telling us how to behave
Oh
and
yeah.
what to think and
Yeah.
who to
Hardly.
be, you know.
That's ended too well for us.
Yeah, we kind of have a bit of a history with that,
We
so
do.
you know, it's,
Slightly.
yeah, it is a trigger point for us, and we do get, like, we do reject that outright. We absolutely do. But it's that behavior we're rejecting, not the people. And unfortunately, you know, there's a lot of I mean, there's 8 or 9 million Americans who come over here every year. I think, I don't know, I could have that figure wrong. I'm pretty sure that's the latest figures that I looked at, but I could be
Wow.
wrong. Maybe that's tourists generally rather than just Americans. But anyway, um, the question actually was, how can those wanting to work through the ancestral trauma accomplish that with so many in the homeland so rejecting of them? I would say, again, come at it with an open mind, and just don't presume that you have an entitlement to an identity that that we have had to fight very, very hard to hold on to, you know, because everybody's dealing with their own trauma and everybody's dealing with their own issues, obviously, around it. But, you know, it's just, it's how you approach it. And I happen to know the person asking this question, and I have to say, personally, I find that you approach it very well. And I've never had that kind of an issue or like that. Nothing that you've ever said or done has got my back up, for whatever that's worth. Where, you know, some of your countrymen and countrywomen very much would get my back up, you know, for all sorts of reasons. Sorry, I'm just keeping an eye on the rest of the chat here. Cordelia says, also anti-blackness and racial categories have global reach, but are very different in different places. Absolutely. And I think, especially in a white North American context, we often don't have a good role model or story for what a respectful diasporic relationship is, and it gets gummed up with a lot of other stuff, including racism and so on, that happens in North America. Yeah, and again, it's further kind of muddying those waters. So yeah, there's a lot going on here, obviously, and we're not going to sort it out today. But
the funny thing is that even amongst our own, we can be a bit like, I mentioned before that my mum is English. Now she's lived in Ireland longer than she lived in England now at this stage, because they moved over when I was born, or before I was born. So the majority of her life has been in Ireland, and that would have been thrown in my face, our face. Well, I can only speak for myself, and my face a lot. But even, I would have people saying to me that, I'm anglicised because of having, even though I was born in Ireland and I grew up here, and the rest of my family is Irish, that lives in Ireland. So, we don't have a great history with foreigners.
Outsiders, yeah.
Yeah. And it's really, really fucking hard.
I know. And come here, look, nobody's saying that the Irish are perfect either. Like,
God, no.
Last
That's
month's,
exactly what I was saying.
Yeah,
They're very much not.
No, and last month's, we had a really interesting discussion last month with Eilish, who is an Irish American person living here, and she had a very interesting perspective on it as well, and as somebody who grew up being told that she was Irish, and I think the person that asked that question would have had the same thing, and obviously there's a huge amount invested in that, and it's, looking back at the history of it, like we have on the one hand, we have, as we mentioned the last time, we have like Daniel O'Connell, and he's talking about the Black Civil Rights Movement and saying that those people are our brothers and sisters and we have to support them when we go over there. And then you have, when we did go over there, then you have the Irish who were effectively, black when they went over there, and were very much side by side with the black communities. They started to use their white privilege and they started to climb socially, and they became white, and now obviously they were white, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know,
socially, like,
perspective,
like at the time. And like, I know personally, I feel very, very uncomfortable talking about this because, like, we have no history generally, like with working with or growing up with people of color or those kind of communities in Ireland. Like, we were so insulated from it, and we don't have the context and we don't have the language, and so I'm frequently out of my depth with with any of this and really struggling to learn it, but like, as with anything, like, all we can do is our best, and again, try and kind of come at things with an open mind and addressing our own privileges, and trying to be as aware as we can around not fucking traumatizing anybody else, so it's
exactly. It's just, it's really hard.
Yeah.
It all is.
And I think, I was listening to, again, the Blind Boy podcast. I think everybody is fucking listening to the Blind Boy podcast, and he's brilliant. And if you haven't ever listened to his podcast, you need to go and listen to it right now. But I think
not right now.
No, not right now. Obviously, stay here for this. But after this, go and listen to it. But he was talking about Listún Varna over in Clare, and that they'd voted not to have the Syrian refugees come in, and that is fucking shameful. That is shameful. There was something like a 97% vote, or again, numbers, I don't know. But the town basically voted to keep the refugees out of their little town,
God.
Like, considering our history, like that's what I don't understand, when you come, and again, it's that rejection of the outsider that is, it is normal human behavior, but it's not acceptable human behavior, and we need to be aware of that, and we need to be nipping that shit in the bud straight away,
Definitely.
Yeah. Shame on you, Lisdoonvarna. Shame on you,
Yeah,
and anywhere
exactly.
else around.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Ooh.
boo, hiss. Right, back to the questions, because we do actually have a question on the screen here. If you could make every person beginning this path read just one book, and this path being Irish spirituality particularly, read just one book, what would it be? Now, this is the one that stumps everybody.
Really?
Yeah, well, I think it's the idea of picking just one book,
Okay, yeah.
but
Yeah,
it's
definitely.
more a case of like, if you could kind of guarantee that everybody that you came across had read at least this one book, what would
Okay.
that book be? You know, maybe I should rephrase that.
Okay, well, I'm probably a bit biased here,
Mm-hmm.
but it's really hard for me to choose one, so I can only tell you the one that I read, and that. So when I kind of, as I said, when I moved back to Ireland, or when I moved back to Wexford, and and started going to the moots and stuff, I met somebody who who really helped me, and that was Luke Eastwood.
Oh yeah,
And yeah, I know he's a friend of yours as well, and
yeah,
he's a very good friend of mine.
it's a good egg.
And he really is. And we started working together very closely. I absolutely adore him as a person. He's one of the most uh, authentic people, and he doesn't he's a very ethical person as well. So he um I started, yeah. So I started, and I learned a lot from him, and I joined his grove, his Druid grove, and we worked together in that for many years. And he has a book which is the Druid's Primer, which he wrote about, oh geez, it must be about 8 years ago now, I'd say. Well, definitely over 5 years. And that would be the one for me. I think he goes into he put so much work into it, and as we know, there's very varied material out there, and a lot of it is very hard to plow through. So he did he did all the work and all the research. He brought a lot of different threads together, and it's in a very presentable, very easy to read way.
Fantastic. Well, I've put
And
the
I would
name.
recommend that to anybody.
Yeah, I've put his name and the book's name there in the chat, so everybody signed on to the mailing
I
list.
do have to say that, and I'm not just saying this because I wouldn't, but the other book that I also read a few years ago that really I found very good is your book as well. So they'd be my two go-to. My two go-to books would be Luke's and yours.
Can I ask which one of mine? Because
the Guide to Irish Spirituality.
yeah,
Is it?
practical guide. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Morto.
Oh, it's true. We actually did a swap. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
We did it, and it was really funny because when you came to do the talk at Asia that year, many years ago, and you had your book with you, and I really wanted, because I'm big into bartering, and I really wanted to ask you. I can't insult you by asking you. I want to swap your book for a piece of jewelry.
You can fucking ask me anything, girl.
I didn't, but I got to know you a bit better, and I did, and I was really glad that I did, and you accepted.
Your jewelry is amazing. I'll put a link at the end of the presentation here to your oak. Oh, I'm going to get it wrong. Your
Oak Tree Holistic Therapies.
Thank you. Can people look at your jewelry through that?
Actually, your jewelry is on another side, which is Crystal Healing Ireland.
Crystal Healing Ireland. I'm just going to stick that in the chat then as well, okay?
No problem.
And there's the link to the Facebook page for Oak Tree.
Facebook page, yeah.
So so that's all in the chat there as well. So okay. Oh, Cordelia just had a question there as well. Am I correct in my remembering that direct provision for refugees in Ireland is also not very good? You are very much correct in remembering that, Cordelia. We have a situation in Ireland where people have been in a temporary direct provision situation for a good, what is it now, 8 or 9 years, I think, since that system. And what it means is when they come in, they go into like a holding system. So when refugees come in, they go into a holding system where they're temporary. Where they're not allowed to work. They're on benefits, very meager benefits. They're put into like a hostel system, in shared accommodation and dormitories and small rooms, basically, with no cooking facilities or anything like that, and they get food delivered to them every day. And it really is like a very temporary setup, which I think when it first came in, it was possibly a good idea, but it's after getting bogged down. A good idea as in like just a staging point for temporary aid. Like theoretically, if it was temporary, like as in a week or two, that would be okay, to kind of get people processed and into the country safely and into the system. But obviously, shit just got stuck, and we don't have the resources or the funds or possibly the political will to, well, we would have the resources and the funds if we weren't if we hadn't bailed out the banks and all the rest of that shit. Don't even get me started. But yes, and we don't treat refugees very well in Ireland, unfortunately, currently, and there are people who are working to try and help that, but again, the political will and probably the public will is not there for it, which is shocking and disgraceful and contributing to our fucking trauma, to be honest.
The amount of fights, and to be honest, I just stopped doing it because it's just soul destroying. The amount of Facebook fights I've got into with people, whenever you mention homelessness or whenever you mention refugees, they go, oh, just our own should be housed first. And, it's just, and people get really, really fucking, wound up about it.
Yeah.
And it's heartbreaking. Heartbreaking. Of course, I'm compassionate for our Irish homeless and everything. But they're two totally different things, number one, and they've both totally different. Anyway, I'm not going to get started either, but it's just it's soul destroying, and it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, and the people, like, we have been put in a position where we're kept in this fucking poverty mentality because of the austerity that's been forced on us, and we're turning on each other, and that's a big part of what's happening, and it breeds this, like, we're a tiny island with very small communities, and it just breeds this horrible mistrust and desperate grabbing on and holding on to whatever you have or you perceive you have or you think you could have, for our own, or for, which really means for you, yourself, your family, your loved ones. And it's a situation that no population should be in, but we're forgetting our compassion, and we're certainly forgetting our history, A
lot of the time, I agree with you.
Yeah. And then, on the other side of it, like, we can, like, we give the most, I think, or one of the most charitable donations in Europe. Our population do. We have this fantastic warmth, which I believe is our nature, and the acceptance into communities, and the building of communities, and the taking care of our communities, and it's just we're put into this situation of us and them, and that's not right, and it's not natural. But again, it's no fucking excuse for racism either,
No, never.
No. So, okay. What advice do you wish someone had given you that you would like to give people starting out on this path? Don't get into a conversation with Anna and Lora about racism or feminism, because they'll fucking take your head off. That's great advice.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Wow, what advice would I give to someone? to go to the fucking shit that people organize.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
not. I am joking, but I'm not joking either. Just don't be looking for stuff outside of your own. Unless, of course, unless you want to. I mean, I'm not the boss, but like, you know, connect with your own as
Yeah.
if as much as you can, or as much as you want to,
Yeah.
and do the shit, like do the work. And it's not, this is, go outside,
Mm.
get outside if you can, and if you
Yeah.
can't, bring some outside in.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it's back to that community and back to that support and supporting people in your community, and doing a bit of work yourself
Yeah,
to help out, or to and helping out could mean just showing up.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There's so many amazing. I was so lucky when I kind of started getting serious, because there were so many amazing people who really, really helped me out, and I really just appreciate each and every one of them. And there still are
Mm.
people,
Yeah.
nobody. There's so much out there that is available to people, and just it doesn't take much to find it.
Yeah.
So yeah, and don't be afraid of. I think probably one of the things that really I would definitely say is, don't be afraid. I mean, as we're talking about Irish spirituality, don't be afraid of the gods.
Mm.
You know,
Mm.
they are there, and they will definitely, like, they like be. My experience is that, most of them anyway, unless you catch them on a bad day, they like being contacted.
Yeah.
They want to be approached.
Mm.
And you can actually have a really, I don't want this to sound patronizing, but you can have a really like, kind of almost like a friendly relationship with them, like,
Oh, yeah.
chat to them like you would a friend, or
Yeah.
not to be afraid of them. And I think that goes back to a lot of our heritage as well, that we, and even though I wasn't brought up as a Catholic, obviously I was brought up in a Catholic country.
Mm.
So and a lot of my family are Catholic as well, so my dad's family would be Catholic, but the God, God, the Catholic God is very much a removed,
Mm.
this removed being in the sky, and you have to go access God through a priest,
Mm.
and but not to be afraid of that, not to be afraid of having a personal
Mm.
relationship with your deity.
Yeah, and like for all we're kind of giving out earlier on about the Irish pantheon and the stories and the lore being quite dense, um, they really do respond to those kind of relationships and
Yeah,
friendships, as you say,
yeah, definitely, yeah,
and 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 it is very much a reflection, I believe, as well, of our culture,
yeah,
of and I think if you're looking at Catholicism, look at the relationship that people have with the saints, and that's
yeah,
more,
exactly,
yeah, that's more in
exactly,
line, like, with,
definitely, yeah,
and even the good neighbors, and
yeah,
the sites and the wells, and
yeah.
going and visiting the graves, like, that's ancestor work right there. And
What?
it's
Yeah,
just it's all right there in our society. And it's not that it's kind of interchangeable or whatever, but there's elements of it that you're going to be very, very familiar with, and you can use that kind of cultural sense that you have, of how to relate to these beings, to access the gods that way. And it is very much like starting a friendship. Don't go with your one hand longer than your other, as John would say. um, with your with
with
your
their hands swinging.
yeah, with your hand swinging. Bring them something, be polite, be
Yeah,
respectful, uh,
yeah,
do a little bit of work for them. Just make sure that you're being polite and you're being aware around that. And in my experience, and obviously in Anna's experience, you'll get a good response.
oh, definitely.
Mm. Okay, so Gemma, and I think we might have touched on this already, but Gemma McGowan asked, I'd love to know about all the different healing modalities Anna works with and how she was called to study them. So
as I said before, I started off with the counselling, and that was mainly because I'd had a massive breakdown myself, and or as my therapist calls it, a breakthrough, not a breakdown,
right.
And it really was. Mm-hmm. But yeah, and I had so much help from, even though we like to give out so much about mental health services here, I had amazing help from the mental health services. And it really, before that, I was working in sales, and as I said, selling my soul to the devil, if I believed in the devil. And I literally went from like that. I had this breakdown, and I wasn't able to work, and then I was like, do you know what, there's something in this counselling stuff. So I decided to train as a counsellor, and that was my start, really. And then I'd also moved back to Wexford at that stage, so I was becoming involved with, as I said, more with kind of, Wexford's a great place as well. There's a lot of pagan activity going on in Wexford, and I was so lucky to meet up with really amazing people. And after the counselling, then I was already seeing Coit Brannigan as a client, as a shamanic client, and I thought, God, this stuff, there's something about this. I wonder, and I was looking for something other than counselling that was more kind of touched off the more spiritual aspects of, and more kind of energetic, and physical as well. So just at that time, Coit had started up a new group of apprentices, and I asked her, very much tongue in cheek, thinking that she'd say to me, "Don't be ridiculous." She didn't, and it kind of went from there. And the group kind of disbanded, and I ended up just training on my own with her. And then during that time, I was doing a lot of work. I'd always worked a lot with crystals. As I mentioned before, I make my own crystal jewellery, and I trained as a crystal therapist and as a Reiki therapist. Now that's very interesting, because I kind of, that was kind of around the start of it. And now looking back, I think, why did I go for an Eastern, an Eastern kind of modality? But to be honest, I use Reiki every day, and not Reiki, but hands-on healing. And I use that with nearly every client I see, and I find it is incredibly healing. There's amazing work that can be done just by putting your hands on someone in a willful way. No, willful is probably the wrong word.
No, I know what you mean. Yeah.
So that, I suppose, the Reiki really helped me with that, and my biggest, I suppose, one of my biggest passions is, and I'm really lucky that I get to do this. I worked as a teacher for a number of years. I was an English teacher and an Italian teacher, Italian language teacher, and I loved teaching. And that was years ago. It was a good few years ago now, when I was living abroad and stuff, and also when I came back to Ireland. So I have a great passion in teaching, and now a lot of the work that I do is actually teaching these healing modalities that I use myself and teaching them to other people. And that's really my big passion, is putting together, these healing modalities that I've learned, that I work with, and then and also with my passion for teaching and empowering other people to be able to do these things for themselves. One of my other biggest passions then would be working with pendulum healing, not dowsing, but actually using a pendulum for healing.
Right.
So yeah.
There's another private question in here. I'm very familiar with the healing modalities, as my wife is a healer with more modalities than I can describe. My question is, how do you merge these with Irish shamanism?
It's very easy, because basically Irish shamanism is whatever the apart from some of the doing journey work and contact with spirits and with ancestors, and drumming, rattling. It's really whatever you want it to be. It's whatever you make it, and I am an Irish person practicing Irish shamanism, so whatever I want to do within that is Irish shamanism. It's
Right.
it's handing, I believe anyway, handing the mantle over. When you hand the mantle over, then you make it your own. We don't really, and you've spoken about this a lot, a lot of the Irish stuff that used to go on and what was done, we don't really know a lot of what a lot of that was, because it wasn't a written down tradition, it was an oral tradition. A lot of that was lost. So some of it's guesswork, and some of it's putting the jigsaw pieces together, and some of it is passed down from person to person. So that's really that's what I think.
Okay. So I think this is our final question anyway on the slides. Owen de Vardoon, who we had an interview with a couple of months ago, a very interesting guy. Cultural appropriation is something many of us are aware of, sensitive to, and struggle with. What advice would you give to those who wish to celebrate and take part in traditional acts, practices, rites, and rituals, mainly associated with another ethnic group, while not appropriating them?
So my first feeling when I look at this is, oh shit, because it's a very touchy subject, and rightly so. I'm going to be completely honest. I hadn't even heard of appropriation. I'd say probably a year and a half ago. I didn't even know what it was. And I'm still learning. I still walk on a lot of feet, and I've got a big mouth, and I've got quite big feet as well, and they fit quite well into that mouth. So I end up apologizing a lot, and I try to listen when other people tell me, that what I'm doing is possibly appropriation. And I'm still learning. I really don't feel like I would be in a position to give anybody else advice about that kind of thing, because I'm not really, I'm still learning about it myself, and I'm still making loads of mistakes.
Yeah, and I think, we definitely already touched on this, talking about dealing with people of colour and other people's histories, and, all that kind of stuff, as well as people trying to take from us then as well, outside of Ireland. And it is a minefield, and it's hard to give anybody advice on that. I think all we could say really is that, again, it goes back to that kind of respectful and not feeling that you're entitled to anything. And if somebody does turn around and say, this is my lived experience, and what you're doing or what you're saying or, what you've just done is hurtful, or, is damaging my culture in some way, then you have to actually step back from that, and you have to think about that. You have to consider it. You have to be aware of your own privilege, regardless of what you need or want. Like, if it's not yours and you don't own it, then you might think that you're respecting it, or you might think that you're celebrating it, but you have a very limited perspective on that because you're not inside that culture. And I say you, I'm not talking to you, Anna, specifically.
Oh yeah, I know.
And I'm talking myself as much as anything, and it's just, those kind of, if you go and, again, you're going and you're looking for that kind of authentic connection, and you are looking to celebrate something, or you're looking to connect into something that you feel drawn to in some way, then that's actually great, because a lot of the cultures, they need that energy, and they need that kind of, they need those conversations to be happening outside their own very small communities. But it's how that's being done. And if a native person is leading that, then you don't take from that. You can support them. You can, like, it's kind of like, oh God, I might get myself into trouble. But it'd be like me as a white writer, you know, who's a big superhero fan. I'm not going to, in any stretch of the imagination, I'm not going to write a think piece on Black Panther, you know.
Yeah.
There are so many Black writers, both African and American, actually, you know, and I feel that, you know, it's really not my place to be like, I'm so into that, and, you know, fucking Wakanda forever. Like you know, I'm there, like, and
Yeah.
I'm loving seeing that, that uncolonized, you know, that, like, that kind of, that spoke to me and that sang to me in a way, and not that I'd be taking it, obviously, but I can relate to it from our own colonial history, you know.
Yeah.
But there is no way I'm going to sit down and write a piece on that. You know, there's no way I'm going to go to a Black Panther showing in a cinema dressed up as one of the characters, or do you know what I mean? Like, and that's the difference. Like, where I can use my platform as it is to amplify, like, and I share a lot of articles that are written by people from within those cultures, you know. I actually have a lot of friends. I went to Tanzania last year, and I have friends in Tanzania, and I've had conversations with them about their perceptions of it and where they're coming from. And, you know, and I'm, my job in that is to listen, you know, and my job in that is to support what's happening there. And like, me as an Irish person, I might look at Wakanda and think, you know, oh, if only Ireland wasn't colonized, like, we could have that power and we could have that. Like, there is an element of white people taken from, you know, a black moment, you know, and trying to take over. And like, I have to be aware of that. And I have to be aware of my
Yeah.
privilege in that. And as much as I'm moved by that, and as much as I want to celebrate it, I have to stay back from that, you know. And like, I don't like that personally. Obviously, I don't, because I want to be right there and I want to be celebrating that. But it's not my fucking place. It's not mine, you know. And I can celebrate it in my own way, and I can celebrate with them rather than celebrating instead of them. Am I making sense?
It's just really hard because it's constantly trying to check yourself, but
Yeah.
it's also a lack of education as well, you know, and it's trying to always second guess yourself as well, and that can be really hard too, you know. Not second guess yourself, but it's, and I think anybody who's sensitive as well, like, if I thought that I had hurt somebody in a way, culturally, or, you know, appropriation way, I'd be beating myself up for so long, you know. And it's the last thing I'd want to do. But sometimes it's just ignorance, and it's not something that I would have wished to have done, you know, ever to have hurt someone. But that doesn't change I've hurt them, you know. And all, like, you know, and that's, I can only work with the way I was brought up, and exactly, and try and do better the next time. And also try and speak to other people about it as well, you know.
And
in a non-patronizing way.
And it's work. It's hard work. You know, it would be much easier for us to just go in and take what we wanted, and of course that's what's always happened. But it's work that needs doing, you know.
Definitely. And it's worthwhile.
No matter how hard it is, we're making a new world right now, you know, and it needs to happen. So I would say, you know, take all of that advice probably with a pinch of salt, because it's two white women talking about it. But
exactly.
You know,
we go again. Exactly. And of course we have our own history in Ireland, even though, you know, a lot of the time when you talk about appropriation, a lot of people think about African appropriation or, you know, Native American appropriation, but we have our own history with the traveling community as well, you know. And that's a very, very difficult and very sensitive topic that a lot of people mightn't be aware of, you know, outside of Ireland. So it's something that we do need to be really careful of on a much more local level.
And we also have it, you know, dealing with modern paganism, and I know you deal with it and I deal with it on a daily basis. You know, people are all into Celtic this and Celtic that. And,
exactly. Very good point.
It's mixing it up, and it's just like, it is just as appropriative when you're, no matter what culture you're taken from, if you're
Yeah.
not native to it. Cordelia actually has a very good point here. She says, a good rule of thumb I use for cultural appropriation: is the money going to white people, or is it going to the community from which this practice or knowledge comes from? And, you're not going to go far wrong. Like if there's a money trail, and I suppose money could be substituted for exposure, or, any support, or, any, if there's no physical money involved in it. Rebecca says, have you been given permission or asked to share what you've been taught? Yeah, and like that's another good one. If you are drawn into a community, or you're drawn into a practice, or you're gifted with something, do you have permission to share that, or are you just taking that then and using it for your own ends, or to make money off, so I
That
think,
one can be a bit difficult, the permission
yeah.
one, I mean, because say it's like, as you said, the Celtic one. Who do you ask?
Yeah, yeah,
You know?
yeah, yeah,
If it's a cultural thing, like who within
yeah.
that community or culture do you ask for
Yeah, well, I
permission?
mean, like, say I have the otherworld journeying technique, which is
Yeah,
very unique to me. So, I was in a situation recently where, or last year rather,
I
where,
remember that.
yeah, a guy an English guy, he'd taken a couple of my classes, and, I find that he has like 3 or 4 different websites up teaching it, and teaching it badly. I think that was the bit that really got me. But he's also teaching runes, and he's teaching,
Oh,
he's turning a book on whatever, like, and he's not a part of any of those cultures. And I mean, he is colonialism, fucking walking
yeah,
colonialism, like,
yeah. Oliver
Um,
Cromwell, 101.
yeah, absolutely. Michael Keneally is his name, by the way. Don't touch him with with a barge pole, and I have absolutely no problem and no shame naming and shaming him, because he is ripping people off left, right, and centre, and he's doing it badly. He's not.
And not even with his own stuff.
No, no. So, when you have a situation like that, I mean, I don't know if he's literally taken the classes that I gave him and has just, repackaged them or whatever. But say with something like my journeying technique, like if any of my students were teaching that, and we're using it in their classes, or teaching that particular technique. I mean, obviously I don't own journeying generally, or the
Yeah.
Irish Otherworld, or anything like that, but it is a very particular technique that I use. So in that situation, like, obviously, if there's permission, like somebody actually did come to me, and they run a group in America, and they said, I'd love to use your technique just for journeying with them. And she came to me specifically, and she asked me, and she has paid for it. She's on the Patreon, and and like, that's okay, and she's not kind of profiting off it, and it is work that's out there in the world, and I want it to be helping people. So again, if there's somebody to ask permission from, absolutely do that. If there's not, if it's a general cultural thing, then I'd say as Cordelia said there, a good rule of thumb is to follow the money. And if
Yeah.
it's going to white people, and it's not going back into the native communities, then I wouldn't be touching it either, personally. But of course, again, we're not the boss of you, and you can do what you fucking like.
Exactly.
But you won't get a day's good luck from it, I can tell you. So,
but at the end of the day, as I said, I've a lot to learn still, and I'm just trying to learn and trying to do the best I can. And I know I'm going to make loads of mistakes, but hopefully the next time I won't make that same mistake.
yeah,
and
yeah,
that's about all I can really say about that.
yeah, and I think I don't think anybody can kind of ask for more than that. If somebody is genuinely doing the work and making the effort, and learning from the mistakes and not repeating them, then what else can
Luckily,
you
I've
do?
got some good people around me who are very happy to give me a good kick up the arse anytime I do make mistakes, so I do become well aware of them.
Yeah. Okay, so how can people best get in touch with you? We have the Facebook page here, which is Oak Tree Holistics. I love that name.
Yeah, I do run that with my partner, Maeve. So a message to that could kind of go to either of us.
Okay.
So the best way to contact me really would be, I don't mind people sending me messages to my personal account, which would just be Anna Nikut. I can write that up.
I'll put it in the chat here. Anna Nikut, CU Fada T, or?
Yeah, that's the one.
Anna Nikut at Gmail, is it?
Oh, my address is anna.coot in English at gmail.com. Yeah.
Anna dot. Oh, did you want to give it? Sorry. I thought you were giving me your.
Yeah, no, that's fine too. That's absolutely fine. I can put that up as well. I never even thought of email.
Okay. So, perfect. So, but if they were to find you on Facebook anyway, and I put the Crystal Healing Ireland
Lovely.
in the chat as well, so people will get that. And when this goes up on Facebook in a couple of weeks' time, I'll put all the links underneath. So if you're watching on Facebook, go down and check the description below, and you'll get links to contact Anna. And yeah, so thank you so much, Anna, for
not at all. Thank you. You're very welcome. I was so nervous.
Why? We've had chats before.
I know, but never like officially
formal.
Yeah,
formal process.
YouTube, Facebook stuff, you know.
Okay, so we do this work every month. So again, if you're listening on or watching on the YouTubes, you can support this work on patreon.com/Lora O'Brien.
Do that.
Because I do a lot of community work for free. So if you'd like to buy me a pint or a cup of coffee every month, then please do. Yeah, and there's some really cool rewards up there as well. I run it like a kind of a membership site almost for your authentic Irish connection. So please do check that out. And otherwise, join my mailing list community, because you will get live access to these interviews every month, and you will get access to a Google folder before anybody on YouTube gets it. So if you're watching on YouTube, you're late to the party. You need to join the mailing list, and you'll get like a month's live access to these chats beforehand, and you'll be able to join in and chat and ask questions at the time. So do join the mailing list, and again, the link will be down below. Okay.
Thanks so much.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. And I'll finish this up, and slán.
See you soon.